Hi, and welcome to Holistic Medicine Chats. I'm Becky, and this is Dr. Nick. And on episode 2 today, we are going to be discussing the organic acids test, or OATS for short.
One thing I wanted to mention is our chat today is for educational purposes only. We really don't intend any of this information to use for treatment of a child or adult for that matter. If you do have a test that has abnormalities on it, you or your child, please get in touch with a experienced provider who knows how to read these and create a therapeutic relationship. Please get treatment that way, because these are complicated tests. We're going to be going over some general things, but there's always exceptions, and just want to make sure that you or your child get the best care possible. So the urine organic acid test, or OAT test, has been around for several decades. It's probably one of the most versatile tests that we have available to us. There's a couple of reasons for that. I think one of the first reasons is that it's a urine test. You get a first morning void. You just get the first pee that you kid have in the morning. You send it off. You get a tremendous amount of information. No need to go to the lab, get blood drawn. The interpretation of the test is quite broad. As I said earlier, there are many exceptions, but there's definitely some general things that you can get from the test, and that's kind of really what we're going to focus on today. Keep in mind, for everything we say, there'll be 10 exceptions, right? We're not going to necessarily go into the exceptions. That's where you want to be, working with a MAPS doctor or a functional med doctor or something who could use those. But we're going to be doing more like a general overview. And it's more really to educate and get families comfortable with looking at this test, not necessarily interpreting it yourself, but at least having kind of a general overview of it, so you kind of know what you're looking at. The OAT test, it really looks at about 4 things in general. When you look at all the different analytes on it, an organic acid test or an organic acid, what they really are is they're metabolites, either intermediary or end-stage metabolites, mostly of energy metabolism. So if you kind of go through all these, the majority of different pieces of the organic acid test in one way or another are related to that. But what we're looking for, we're kind of looking at the 30,000-foot view of this test. The 4 big things we're looking at is inflammation, catabolism. Catabolism basically means energy production. You can be anabolic, where you're creating things using energy to create, or catabolic, where you're breaking things down to take energy from it. And it's an important distinction in state, especially in children. The third one's oxidative stress, and the 4th one's insulin resistance. Now, the insulin resistance piece, I think in children, especially children with autism, I don't think it's a huge issue. That's more, I would say, in adults when we're evaluating this. But it does occur, especially in some of the kids that are obese, not very active. It can be an issue, so it shouldn't be forgotten. But we're going to focus mainly on the inflammation, the energy metabolism, and the oxidative stress piece, because we're focusing this talk about more on kids that are on the spectrum rather than kind of the general populations.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
So, like Quest Diagnostics does an organic acid test. How do the mainstream organic acid tests differ from functional medicine?
Yeah, so that's a great question. People will see this test, and it'll be $350 or $300, whatever it costs.
Right.
And they're like, well, I'd rather get it through Quest, get it done through my insurance. The problem is the organic acid test that Quest and LabCorp run is different. That one is focused mainly on these organic acids that are found in primarily genetic disorders.
Okay.
So it's still helpful if your child has a genetic disorder. And some of those genetic disorders are evaluated in the Great Plains Lab or Genova organic acid tests. Those are the 2 main ones that we use. I prefer the GPL one, but the Genova one has an organics test that's also very good. They will also evaluate for some of these organic acids found in genetic disorders, but that's not the primary purpose of the test. Whereas for Quest or Lab, that is the primary purpose of the test. So when people get those, they'll see it's a very different test in a lot of ways. And it's, from my perspective,
I had one done thinking it was going to be the same thing, but it wasn't.
Right.
So.
And hopefully it came out normal.
Yeah, it was.
Yeah. So, and the thing is, if you get some abnormalities on the Quest or Lab one, some of those, although it can be fixable, a lot more of them are more just to get a diagnosis, and there's a lot of cases, there's not a whole lot you can do. Whereas with the OAT test, we're talking about the GPL or genoma one, there's a lot you can do.
Yeah.
A tremendous amount, because we're really focusing on metabolism, we're looking at gut health. And then after talking about the three kind of main issues we're looking at, which is inflammation, energy metabolism, oxidative stress, we kind of break it down into three systems that you can kind of look at, and that's your GI system, your detoxification system, and neuroendocrine system. And by breaking it into these categories, we try to make sense of these, whatever it is, I think 70 some odd analytes or something. It's a lot of analytes. So you have to kind of have a pattern to put them in. Otherwise, it gets very hard to interpret. Some of them are pretty straightforward in terms of, okay, that's low, give that something.
Right.
You get a couple that are pretty straightforward, but a lot of them are not. A lot of them are, this is low. That means you have to, skip this one or give this in this kind of dose, but not that kind of dose. It gets a little tricky.
Right.
So it's not one of these tests where, some of these tests will have a computer printout that just spit it out. You follow the computer printout. It's not really a whole lot different than if a doctor interpreted it. You just have to go with the flow on it. This one you could do that, but you're really losing a lot of the power of the test. I mean, I would say you're losing probably 80-90% of the power of the test. But this is definitely one of my favorite tests. I use it all the time. Sometimes I'll use it within a NutriVal. A NutriVal is a genoma test that also does blood and urine, but it has an organic acid test in it. That's one way, or they also have just the standalone one, and the original is the Great Plains one, which has certain analytes that actually the other ones don't have. So they all kind of stand on their own for their own uniqueness and what they can offer.
Different benefits for each one.
Yeah, I get the question all the time, well, which one's better? And it depends. I mean, it depends who you're treating and what you're looking at. I like the NutriVal, but there's times where the GPL test is far superior. So it's not a question I can answer without seeing the kid.
If you had a patient who was choosing between a comprehensive stool analysis or an organic acid, they can only do one, what would be a better starting point?
Probably generally speaking, unless the kid had some really obvious signs and symptoms, I'd probably say the OAT test would give you more info.
Okay.
But again, it depends. But I would say generally OAT probably, because the OAT has a pretty big section in it that talks about gut. I mean, it doesn't replace stool test, but if you have enough positives on an OAT, that's usually good enough to move forward with treatment.
Right.
I think the biggest problem with the gut section of it, which is
I'm skipping ahead, sorry.
No, it's all right. Because I don't have the numbers memorized here, but which is I know I should work on it. Which is basically the first 18 analytes, right? The whole first page. Sometimes you'll see like a single elevation. Unless it's extremely high, sometimes that's hard to make a call on that, especially if there's no symptoms. But if you're seeing 2 or 3 or 4 elevated, and they're significantly elevated, because you got to remember, a lot of these organic acids that are on here, especially the ones that have to do with the gut, they are not produced by the human body, right? So if it's coming out in the kid's pee, something in their body is making that, not that, right? So that means, and we know that there's always going to be some of these microbes there, like Candida, for instance. There's not a person on Earth that doesn't have Candida in their body. Mm-hmm. So you're going to have some arabinose coming out, which is
just want a healthy balance of it.
Exactly, you should have a bit of it, but if you see it coming back at 100, 200, 300, that's pretty strong for you. Yeah, that's definitely concerning. So I guess let's start with GI system, which is the first page, the first 18 analyzed. The ones that I find most high yield, and again, I'm going to say again, it depends, but we're going to pretend like there's sort of this generic patient, right? That's kind of like nothing stands out. It's very kind of blah. They come in, history's not too exciting, nothing on physical exam. Everything's kind of like, meh, maybe yes, maybe no. And those are actually the perfect patients for these kind of things where you're not getting much on the story to really go with, so you need some clues as far as focusing treatment, because it's just too many directions to go. So when I start off on the first page, number 2, 4, and 7, which is, I'm going to do my best not pronouncing these, so forgive me. The 5-hydroxymethyl-2-furoic acid, which is number 2. Exactly. Say that fast. We'll just call it number 2. Number 2 and number 4.
And this is the Great Plains one, so
yes.
It'll differ depending on the test?
Yes, yeah.
Okay.
This is the Great Plain one. If you're looking at an organics or a NutriVal, the numbers won't correlate, but the names will be similar, actually.
Okay.
So, actually, I will bumble through the names. Just bear with me. It's got some long ones here. 2 and 4 is 5-hydroxymethyl-2-furoic and furan 2,5-dicarboxylic. So, I always look at those for mold exposure. Those tend to be elevated in mold exposure. It's under a general category of yeast and fungal markers. A lot of people think all these markers are for yeast. They're not, actually. The strong one for yeast is number 7, which is arabinose. That one's actually a very strong marker, specifically for Candida. But those are the 3 that I'm always looking at every time I look at these. If I see high mold exposure numbers, that tends to kind of pique my interest as does this child possibly have Sears mold sensitivity or something like that. Arabinose, as probably a lot of the viewers know very well, Candida is just rife in our kids. So many kids have it, and then the kids, the ones that don't have it, put them on a standard American diet for a few months, they'll probably get it.
Right.
Just feed them
give them 1 round of antibiotics.
Yeah, 1 round of antibiotics or a diet of goldfish and waffles, and we'll take care of that pretty quickly. So, the bacterial marker.
Oh, I'm sorry, I had a quick question.
Yeah, sure.
Will it differentiate exactly what kind of mold? Does it give any indicators of, is this toxic black mold or different kind?
Not necessarily, but the fact that if it's elevated, what it's telling us more than anything, rather than the type of mold, is the fact that there's enough exposure that the child actually, or an adult for that matter, is actually processing this. There's enough mold load inside of their bloodstream that they're actually producing these byproducts that are actually being detoxified while they're sleeping and being caught in the first morning boil. Okay. So you got to think in terms of there's enough mold in the kid's body that they're actually making these products at an elevated number.
Right.
So there has to be a significant source somewhere around when you're seeing it. Even if it's not the so-called toxic black mold, which there's basically 6 or 7 different species that we've identified as pretty nasty species. But even the more benign ones, the fact that there's a mold exposure, it's still inflammatory.
Okay.
So when you have a kid who has already, we have a high suspicion of inflammation in the brain, of microglia activation, all this. We don't want anything fueling the fire.
Right.
So anytime I see that, even if I don't think the child has a chronic inflammatory response syndrome or Sears, I still kind of have the family kind of check under the sink, or under the dishwasher. If they live in a place like Georgia or Tennessee, it's a little bit trickier because there's a lot of other potential places you could have mold. Some of the worst places that they found is some of the elevated houses they had. They don't build too many of them in the States this way, but I know in Australia it's a common houses where they'll kind of elevate them. They'll have this little crawl space under the house. Yeah. Apparently there in the more humid areas, that's just
maybe you just trapped in.
Exactly. It makes it actually quite a bit more humid than the surrounding. The surroundings are already like 80-90%.
Yeah, it's dark. It's not getting any sunlight down there.
Yeah. So. Exactly. So you kind of look at how the house is constructed, where they're living, different things. Here in Las Vegas, it's a plumbing leak.
Yeah.
It's always a plumbing leak if it's too dry out here for. Right. Nothing lives out here. It's like
we're lucky we're alive.
That's right. Exactly. Don't run out of water, right?
Yeah.
The next category is bacterial markers. I look at those. I don't find them particularly helpful. When I correlate it with the stool test, I found it more helpful, but those can be tricky. There's one in particular, number 14. That's actually beneficial bacteria. So sometimes that'll kind of throw people off because they'll see it high and they'll see the word beneficial. However, even beneficial bacteria, if you have an overgrowth, can be a problem.
Causes dysbiosis.
Exactly, because
Okay.
because if you have one beneficial strain that's overgrown, it's still taking resources from other beneficial strains, right?
Right.
So that can be problematic, even though it says that you see the word beneficial, you see high, most people just no big deal. That's right. It's paying off, right?
Yeah. And
but
that could be associated with SIBO too.
It could because sometimes in SIBO you have actually some specific pathogenic strains, but more often than not, you just have the normal bugs that are in your colon, but they're in your small intestine. They're just in the wrong place. This isn't differentiating location at all.
Okay.
All it is just the bug is somewhere in the body making this, and it's getting into the bloodstream and filtering out in the urine. So, and that's one of the drawbacks of the test. It's a great test, but it's not perfect. It doesn't tell you anything about location. And that's another issue when we get to neurotransmitters. The neurotransmitters are another one. It doesn't differentiate whether it's gut or brain or anywhere else. But you still get whatever the amount is in the body. And then from there you can, at least you have an idea. Are they low, medium, high, something like that.
So for kids that don't respond well to probiotics, because I see this mentioned a lot by families, could that be a reason why?
Oh yeah.
Too much bacteria?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah. It could be a lot of things, but definitely if you already have a lot of something in there and you're adding more of it, that could be driving the symptoms in some cases. So
too much of a good thing.
Too much of a good thing, absolutely, yeah. The other category is Clostridial bacterial markers. Clostridia are bacteria. It's a spore-based bacteria, so they reproduce by spores, which are these little bacterial eggs that are very resistant to everything. It's very hard to kill. You can't burn them. You can't bleach them. You can't do anything with them. They're hardy and they survive. So Clostridia, and some of the common Clostridias that I think most people are familiar with is botulism. That's a Clostridia. If you make some jam and you don't can it right, and 6 months later you try to eat it, and you can get quite seriously ill from that.
And that's the chemical that's in Botox.
Yeah, exactly. They took that from that, and
those microbiology classes are paying off.
That's right. Yeah, that's kind of, and I love the fact they took something from a pathogen, right, and they kind of turned it into a good thing.
Right.
Well, I don't know how much a good thing it is. Some people can't smile anymore, but within reason.
But they don't have wrinkles. So.
They don't have wrinkles. That's right. They got a perma frown. The Clostridia is, and C. diff, I think, is the other one that's kind of a big one. The Clostridia difficile, and that's the antibiotic-associated diarrhea. That actually people that are hospitalized and get a lot of antibiotics, you can actually die from it. It's quite serious.
Mm-hmm.
It's very tough to treat. Only vancomycin and a few other things work. So the point I'm making, though, is that Clostridia tends to be really hardy. It's hard to get rid of. When it's pathogenic, it can be quite serious.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the particular ones that GPL came up with, and Dr. William Shaw is the medical director, the lab director for GPL. He's done a lot of work on putting this one marker forward called HPHPA. That's
HPHPA.
HPHPA, that's the name. And even he abbreviates it, so I probably couldn't say the full name here, but it's number 16, and then number 17 is 4-cresol. Those two markers are important because they're particularly looking at overgrowth of Clostridia in the gut. Mm-hmm. 4-cresol, number 17, is specific for C. difficile. Now, if you have C. diff, 99 times out of 100, you don't need it on the test.
Right.
It's pretty obvious.
The symptoms are.
I mean, the kid's just going left and right. It's pretty obvious.
Right.
But it's on there, so I think it's helpful. HPHPA, however, I find that to be a very useful marker. And that's actually one of the first things my eyes kind of go to when I look at this. I look at Ravenous, I look at HPHPA. If that's elevated, you're potentially looking at a Clostridial overgrowth. Mm-hmm. Now, where that's pertinent in our kids are, kind of cognitively clouded, have sensory processing issues. They're stimming all day.
Sometimes aggressive.
Yeah, sometimes be aggressive. They can, hurt themselves, hurt others. What happens when you get this overgrowth of Clostridia? It interferes with the dopamine metabolism, and you wind up getting very high levels of dopamine in the brain, which we know will fuel stimming behavior. It can cloud consciousness. Too low a dopamine's bad too. Of course, you can get some very severe depressions and apathy and fatigue. but just like everything else in our body, it's not about, it's about having just enough. If you have too much dopamine, it's toxic to the brain. It'll create neuroinflammation. It'll make microglia activation, all the things we know that are going on in our kids' brains. So that's got to be addressed. And it's an important marker to pick up because a lot of the standard treatments for gut resets, they'll work for a little while, but if you have spore formers in there, what we'll typically see is the kid will get better for a few weeks, maybe a few months even, and then slowly slide right back to where they were because we never got rid of the spores. So these are kids that we specifically will treat with types of antibiotics, pharmaceutical antibiotics typically that will actually kill the spores. So that's why I look for that because a lot of times with a gut reset, I always have a discussion if you want to go more herbally based or pharmaceutical based. This would be one reason where I would be more pushy for pharmaceutical based, just because I would say, look,
it's so resistant.
Yeah, you'll get some great results, you'll be happy, and then it's like someone comes in and just takes that away from you, and the kid just slides back in a couple of months, and then you kind of go back to square one.
So defeating for a parent.
Absolutely. Yeah. And also, you don't want to put the kid through a gut reset too often. I mean, you want to do it the minimal amount possible because it's a lot for the kid to go through.
Mm-hmm.
If you're going to put the kid through it, I mean, sometimes once isn't enough, but hopefully it is. I mean, at least that's what we shoot for. So.
Right.
So that's one that.
Okay, I did have a question.
Yeah,
sorry, I just remembered. Spore biotics or the spore-based probiotics?
Terraflora, Megaspore biotic. I love using those actually.
Okay.
So they don't have Clostridia specifically in there. They have more Bacillus coagulans and Bacillus subtilis and a few other strains. That's actually probably one of my favorite ancillary probiotics. And what I mean by that is, when we do repopulation on a gut reset, we want to repopulate with bugs. Mm-hmm. So I kind of have as the core probiotic, something that's got your lacto and bifido, even the streptomyces, if the kid doesn't have any pandas issues or like that. Those we know are beneficial, so I have that as the core, and then I like adding in the spore-based as well. Spore-based are better tolerated. Occasionally we'll have a child that has trouble with it, but by far most kids tolerate it. And that's the one I've seen the most that when, after a couple of months after the reset, the parents start kind of peeling away some of the treatments. They have the kid on a lot of stuff, they want to peel it away. That's the one I've seen that, they stop it and they'll see, my kid's not the same this week.
Right.
And they put him back on and he's kind of back to normal again. So I think they have a lot of functions we still don't fully understand, but I think overall they're quite beneficial.
You said they're better tolerated for some?
Yeah, by a lot.
Okay, so kids that respond poorly to regular probiotics, the spore-biotics might be.
Yeah,
okay.
Absolutely. And that sometimes I fall back on that where I just can't give them any probiotics. Even after gut resetting, whatever we give them gets bloated, they go nuts.
Right.
But usually at least that one we can keep on so we can at least have something. In theory, you should only have to dose it for, one bottle, which is usually a month or two. Mm-hmm. And the spores should be there and they should be reseeding on their own. So, in theory at least, it's not something you need to persistently have the kids on. And in a lot of cases, they stop and the kids maintain their benefit. But again, for whatever reason, and I'm not really clear why that is, so some kids just need to have it dosed regularly. The spores don't take for whatever reason.
Yeah.
So that kind of covers the GI stuff, I think, with the O test.